Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Suyash. I work with NIPFP. I'm going to give you an overview of regulatory impact assessment. My talk has three parts. The first two parts deal with the theory of RIA or the promise of RIA. If RIA is done well, what are the things that we can gain? What are the gains for the regulatory state in India? And the third part, which is where I'll spend bulk of my time, is going to talk about what will it take for RIA to be successful in India, how we can create enabling conditions for RIA to be useful for Indian regulators. So let me begin. RIA is a term that is generally used for a bunch of tools which can help regulators examine and measure the likely benefits, costs, and other impacts of their proposed regulations. So once you've got these listed, quantified, monetized, you can compare different regulatory interventions for the same problem that you want to solve and choose the one which is most efficient. That's the broad theory of how RIA is supposed to work. A typical RIA report would contain some evaluation of the problem, some clear statement of the objective and the intended effect of the regulation, consideration of the alternative ways to solve the problem and achieve that objective, and assessment of all the impacts of different alternatives so that you can choose the best possible alternative regulatory strategies, and some discussion on what is the best compliance strategy for different alternatives, what are the monitoring and evaluation systems that could be put in place to ensure that the regulation is properly implemented. So that's the main objective, theoretically, of RIA. The other objective is of RIA is to see it as a mechanism for holding the bureaucracy accountable, especially bureaucracy that works inside regulatory organizations. This is an objective that may be important for certain politicians, may be important for us as citizens to ensure that regulators are upholding the rule of law and not using powers arbitrarily. Now, this, again, going on with this theory of RIA, the promise, if the RIA is properly implemented and done well, is that it will induce optimization. It will force people to look at multiple alternatives and compare them and choose the best possible. It will also induce a certain comprehensive analysis, which will make you think about impacts that go beyond immediate impacts and beyond the direct impacts. So you can worry about indirect impacts, long-term impacts, going 20, 30 years down the line. So if you use a method, it induces this kind of an analysis. And if it is possible, it also induces a certain degree of precision in analysis. You can't just take a broad swath of qualitative arguments and say that this particular line of action is good or bad. Now, why do we need a tool to induce these kind of things? Why doesn't optimization automatically occur in the regulatory process? Why is comprehensiveness not a feature of any ordinary regulatory process, and precision is not something that is valued? I think there are two sets of arguments that I think are most important. One is a normal set of arguments that we will hear throughout the course of this, public administration arguments about principal agent problems. Parliament creates these agents called regulators, give them legislative, executive, and judicial powers, and hope that they will work in public interest. So there are issues with this kind of relationship. Regulators can run amok. They can do things which are not necessarily in public interest. Often they can work in their own interest rather than the interest of the public or the pursuit of the objective that they've been given. But so those are issues which are generally talked about for reasons why RIA is required. But I want to talk about more fundamental issues just for a couple of minutes. I think this RIA kind of tool has to be imposed or has to be adopted by regulators because human nature automatically will not do something which is basically optimal or comprehensive or precise. Human reasoning is not geared to do this kind of work automatically. There's a lot of literature on this, on the way humans use reason. I think, there's a lot of debate in it. I'm not saying there's settled debates, but last 30, 40 years of work in cognitive psychology and social psychology shows that we are opportunistically use reason. We are not always optimal user of reason. We are opportunistic user of reason. We come to conclusions first and then find lots of arguments to support those conclusions. The first paper I've cited here is a comprehensive peer review of 30 years of research in these areas, and it's called Why Do Humans Use Reason? It's the most cited paper in this particular field. It's more of a social function to signal reputation that we are smart, we are actually thinking about these issues, while often conclusions have just come to our mind first, and then we're trying to find ways to find evidence and reasons for support those conclusions. Huge confirmation bias, research after research in laboratory as well as real world conditions have showed that we use reason just to support whatever we have come to conclude. We put a very high bar of evidence to look at arguments which are contrary to what we already believe, but are happy to accept very weak arguments for things that we already support. So I think this, and we see that in political, moral issues much more elsewhere. And these issues are there for all humans to some extent in all contexts. But when it comes to power, regulatory power, like a monopoly power of a regulator which has been empowered by the state, it becomes much more relevant. Because if you're a private sector company and you're a manager in a private sector company, have these kind of issues, capitalism will slap you around every day if you take your biases too seriously and get carried away. So you'll have to keep optimizing, improving, inducing reason in your basic decision making. But if you are a state with a monopoly of violence, monopoly of power of this kind, there is no automatic inducement of these things. So you have to make some kind of institutional intervention to induce optimization, comprehensiveness, precision, things that I talked about. This is not to say that reasoning cannot happen. Good reasoning can happen, use of evidence can happen, but it's hard, and you have to design for it, you have to build a framework in which it can happen. So Phil Tetlock is a professor at Columbia who's done a lot of work. He's a cutting edge of work on use of evidence and reason in government decision making, use of expert judgment in decision making. And he thinks that there are certain contexts in which such power is used properly, and in most contexts is not used properly, it is used very opportunistically. So we have to think about what is the context in which it can happen, and RIA is one small intervention in the larger project of ensuring that power is actually used to uphold rule of law and to ensure that good reasoning is happening and use of evidence is going behind the use of power. So all this is like basically the rationale for RIA and all. I'll talk a few things which are more India specific. In addition to the general rationale that we just discussed, public administration, human nature, all those issues, India has, I think, a much stronger case for RIA. We have a huge issue of competitiveness in the economy. No slideshow on this topic can complete without using the key phrase, ease of doing business. So I've just put it there just so that I pass that test. Secondly, we have limited state capacity and huge problems to solve. So if you use RIA, you use rigorous methods, hopefully you can use limited state capacity to create maximum impact, because you'll focus on areas where maximum problems are there and not kind of issues that have happened to have gathered people's attention. And third, we are a transitioning economy. We are going from a socialistic autarky to an open market economy. We have lots of cleanups to do, and RIA provides one framework in which you can do cleanups or existing legacy laws. I mean, these are all potentials. This potential has been realized by some commissions and committees. SSLRC had recommended doing an analysis of costs and benefits before making a regulation, and it was supposed to be a comprehensive analysis for all the impacts and not just direct and immediate impacts. It had also mandated a consultation process through which evidence may be collected and analyzed within the cost-benefit analysis framework. A couple of committees, the committee that was led by Mr. Damodaran has recommended doing an RIA before public consultation process starts, so that you can restructure the consultation process based on the RIA, and comments can be sought in a very structured and specific manner. Ajay Shankar committee had recommended RIA, but it was recommended to be done by a standing expert committee. I'm not sure, maybe the committee also wanted to say that it should be done by the regulators and in addition to be done by a standing committee, but that was not clear from the report, so this is what they had recommended. Now I'll come to the main part of my talk. What will it take to make RIA useful for India? I don't assume that any tool, any gimmick can come to a country and suddenly turn everything into, a land of milk and honey. I think there are lots of things, hoops to jump before we can assume that this kind of a tool will be useful for India. Each country is unique in some institutional ways, and I think we have to worry about the pitfalls here. So just kind of look at these three ways in which RIA could be used. The first way is, I think, what we want. We would want exploratory use of RIA, where you start with an open mind, you look at evidence, and you figure out what is the best regulatory strategy. That's the ideal. But it is equally possible, although not desirable, to use RIA in a confirmatory manner. You already have a conclusion. You want to ban something or you want to allow something, and you now structure whatever evidence is possible, use whatever techniques possible to confirm that. and look good as a person who's reasoning well about a conclusion is already arrived. This is not an exploratory use, confirmatory about existing bias. Third is equally bad, I'm not saying worse, reputational use, which is I'm just doing RIA for the in name only because it has to be done, but I'm not taking it very seriously. I'm just doing it because it has to be done. It makes me look good. I'm a credible entity doing RIAs. I look cool doing RIAs. Now, specific, which of these three, there can be more abuses of RIA. There's only one use of RIA, which is exploratory. Which of these will actually be used is something which depends on context. I'm not saying that we can assume that it will always be exploratory use of RIA. Like we can't assume that power will be only used for public interest. So we need IRIA. Because angels don't govern, so we need IRIA. Because angels don't govern, to ensure IRIA is used well also. So we have to think about those issues. So I would start with the assumption that odds are against an exploratory use of RIA. I talked about human nature, institutional design in India. Quite a few institutions are not designed in a manner that encourage good reasoning process to happen. I'll explain to you a little bit. In certain sectors, political economy is actually such that either the RIA will not be done properly, is not likely to be done properly, or it could actually act against public interest. So I'll talk about those contexts. And third, I think in India, the external accountability mechanism, parliament and other accountability mechanisms are quite weak. And I think in those contexts, it's very easy to get away with RIA in name only or confirmatory RIAs. But we should not take these as fait accompli. These are problems to solve. We have to worry and think about what is the best way to solve these problems. So I'll present some speculations, some thoughts on the ways in which we can create an enabling environment for RIAs in 4 buckets. First, I think it will be useful to distinguish between political and technical issues when doing RIA. Second, I think it's important to design institutional regulatory agencies in a manner that enables good use of RIA. Third, we have to adapt the RIA usage according to the institutional environment that the regulatory agency faces. And fourth, we have to think about how to strengthen external accountability mechanism. I don't have any good ideas on this last one, but I would like to at least put it on the table. Regulations are based on some moral philosophies. When we look at aggregate impact on the society and in benefits and costs and say benefits outweigh the costs, it is implicitly a kind of a utilitarian philosophy. When we put an RIA out there, it is making something which is implicit right now and ambiguous, very explicit. It will show that, okay, some people are going to suffer very badly and lots of people will gain, so we are letting those people suffer and others will gain, so let's go ahead with it. So this raises important political questions which should not be left to expert bodies. There are political questions and there are technical questions. We should distinguish between two. So if suppose you want to, there is this aggregate method of RIA, look at aggregate benefits and cost, but you want to infuse some notion of natural right, some notion of individual non-negotiables, then you have to put it explicitly. Otherwise, in aggregate analysis, many things will look good, but produce outcomes which are in specific cases very bad. So we have to think about what should be in the primary law, what should be prescribed by the government which is elected, and what should be decided by the regulator as a technical expert body, non-political, so to speak. So a couple of examples, just quickly. What should be the weightage given to impact on low-income households? Should we give higher weightage or should we give the same weightage as any other higher income household? In US, for example, Bill Clinton, elected president, in 90s issued the executive order which said that higher weightage will be given to impact on low-income households. Before that, for 40 years, RIAs were done with same weightage to low-income households as high-income households. It's a political question. I don't think it's a technical question leaving to regulators. It will be like priority sector lending. It's a political decision taken by a technical agency. Intergenerational equity, where you think about climate change and those kind of issues, it becomes because the standard way in which discounting is done will mostly ignore intergenerational issues. So we have to think about, this is a political issue. What do we want to think about 70, 80, 90 years from now? So that's a political question and not purely a technical question. So I think in ideal legal context in which this will work is where objectives are clearly stated. The law provides some guidance on dealing with trade-offs. For example, if you have to do consumer protection, you can do excessive consumer protection and kill some kind of a competition, innovation, access, most importantly access. High quality access for a small number of people versus the mediocre quality access for a large number of people is possible. Those trade-offs are possible. It should be provided in the law. How do you think about these trade-offs? What are non-negotiables? What are not up for debate because the aggregate benefit is good? And some methodological other RIA principles have to be given in the primary law. At the moment, I think if you study international experience, too much power is given to experts who are not well suited to take those decisions. And can actually face a lot of backlash if they take political decisions that later backfire. Just a little bit on institutional design for agencies. We have to create agencies which induce reasoning, induce use of evidence. I think some board or commission structure with first term equals as chairperson is better suited for that than all-powerful chairman. I'm thinking RBI. Because you have to face the pressure of a pushback from the others. You can't overrule them immediately and go for it, whatever you want to do. You should have diversity on boards. We put too much emphasis on only experts on boards. You should have at least one or two philosophers, sociologists type people on the board who don't have a group thing, who don't have an invested, cognitive, intuitive view of what is the right answer for a given situation. And we should emphasize on consensus and then give an opportunity to do majority-based voting in boards wherever is necessary. Think about juries. In most contexts, juries necessarily have to come to unanimous decisions. So that forces them to reason. The 12 Angry Men and all of that, the stylized presentation of that. Because then you can actually look at things which maybe 2 persons are only pointing out and 8 are not pointing out. And that's necessary for a good RIA. Regulation process, making process has to be statutorily mandated to be structured around RIA, and consultations have to be transparent and communicative, and it has to be given in the primary law. Otherwise, there are more opportunities to confirmatory and what you call just symbolic RIAs. Data and analysis, obvious. In India, we have a huge problem. There is not enough research which can feed into RIAs. So you're going to use some research that may have been done, and that's only observing 0.5% of the reality, and you're thinking that that's all of it, and then you have to use it and go ahead with it. Little bit on the political economy and the institutional environment. I have 4 categories here. I borrowed James Wilson's classic taxonomy on the types of regulatory environments. So there is an environment in which the dominant interest group is hostile to agencies' goals. The Central Drug Standard Control Organization, pharmaceutical industry is by definition hostile to this organization's goals. You use RIA, there is this one dominant interest group which is fully invested in using that RIA to destroy the agency. So you have to think about the risks that will come out of the situation like this, and what are you going to do to overcome those risks. Then you've got ERA. We've got 2 sets of very dominant and very powerful interest groups, not dominant, powerful interest groups which are conflicting over each other. ERA is the body that sets tariffs for airports. So airlines, very powerful lobby, airports, very powerful lobby, conflicting against each other. Don't worry about it. If RIA is poor quality on either one's favor, the other party will call it out and go to court and win. So I think least need to worry about that. Then there are regulators for which there is a dominant interest group in favor of the objective, which is ICAI, as I'm thinking. Most self-regulatory organizations are basically work to serve their members. And in those situations, I think we have to worry because they will basically do a symbolic or confirmatory RIA. We have to be more watchful about the quality of the RIA. And lastly, controversial, but I would say CCI doesn't have any permanent enemies or friends. CCI has a generic mandate. It, for certain situations, creates a cement industry as an enemy or that enemy of the industry, but doesn't have permanent enemies or friends. So there, I think it's you will not see that in regulation making process, there's too much backlash and all. So it's possible that CCI can do an independent RIA, those kind of. External accountability. There's a very good paper that Devesh Kapoor and Pratap Bhanu Mehta have on parliamentary, parliament as an institution of accountability. Over a period of time, over decades, we have weakened those institutional mechanisms inside the legislative branch which could have held the regulators accountable based on RIA or other information that they have access to. And we have to, I don't know what we can do, but these have to be strengthened and restored. We have to, judiciary has occupied a lot of space for accountability, but judicial mind is not the right mind to look at this kind of information and actually hold agencies accountable. There's a limited role, procedural, rule of law, natural justice upholding role, but the legislative branch is where the bulk of the accountability for this must lie. Civil society consumer groups are quite weak in my opinion. Although this may be changing, but it's still the chattering classes, the upper middle class, technologically connected Twitterati, which is kind of where the change is happening, but the bulk of the Indian society is out of this. And there is very limited policy-relevant academic research in India. Who is going to push back? In US, regulatory agency publishes an RIA, some academic publishes an alternate RIA, and a huge accountability mechanism gets created. People debate and laugh at the quality of RIA done by the regulatory agency. There's a lot of pushback. Just quickly, introducing RIA in India, we have some potential allies. I think some politicians who are interested in holding bureaucrats are worried about, could be our allies. Businesses worried about ease of doing business. Bureaucrats keen to assert intellectual independence, enhance credibility. There are some of those, I guess. consumers worried about under-regulation. They're all are hopefully allies in this kind of fight. It will have to be done through primary laws. It has to be in parliamentary law, like FSLRC has recommended. It has to be given as a mandate. We should be happy if there's a modest beginning and then gradual build-up of capacity and quality of RIAs. It's not going to build over time. I've seen a lot of RIAs in the Western countries. Most of them don't even pass the smell test. So that's the standard of the work at the moment. I have a question. If you need an institutional mechanism for review of RIAs, which is like mandated, like in US, OMB goes through all of these RIAs that are done by agencies and gives a comment. I mean, it's not mandatorily accepted by the agency that is doing the RIA, but it's a question that whether we need an agency like this. Could be CAG, could be Niti Aayog, could be a mechanism inside the PMO.